It's so exciting to learn about the budget and how the State House works with Rachel Coyle, a true expert in how the Ohio legislature operates, and also for us brave enough to dive into what the budget means and what positive effects can come, how we can influence perhaps even the budget as citizens is important. So thank you for coming, Rachel. Please lead us down the big river of the Ohio budget.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here. This is always the fun part, figuring out if our technology works. Okay, everyone should be able to see my screen at this point.
Yes.
Cool. And afterwards, I'd be happy to tell you about Innovation Ohio too, where I am now.
Let's, yeah.
All right. Should work. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to make you all smaller so then you can just see the presentation. Is that working out for you?
Okay. Yeah, let's see. I think each of us can adjust our
there we go.
Our window. That's doing it on your computer, but not on ours. Show grid video. Which one do we push to make our windows smaller?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, now I've just got one picture instead of four.
Okay. And then Richard, on the right, there's this like little line and you can hover over it like this to the center and it has arrows that show up and you can like squeeze it.
Okay, all good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does everybody have I want to make sure that it shows Rachel when Rachel begins to speak.
Yep.
So
does everyone have the presentation up on their screens?
yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Now we have that and we have whoever is speaking is highlighted. At least I do, is one person.
Perfect.
Yep.
Right.
There we go.
Started, and then I'll pop back in afterwards and we can talk to everything, or since it's a small group, you can call out if you get confused during the middle.
Okay, good.
Either way. So let's
Great.
Okay, so basic introduction. So this is how things work at the State House, budget edition. We are currently in the budget process in Ohio, and I'll talk you through how it works and why you should care about it. But just don't worry to start about memorizing any of the information. I'll send it all to Richard afterwards. He can send it to you all. And don't worry also if you've never paid attention to the budget before, that's very common. This is the perfect year to start. So this is a huge year for the budget. So we need the most people possible to be paying attention, to be calling and maybe sending in testimony, which I'll tell you how to do. And you should also remember that you have just an incredible amount of power at the State House level because no one's paying attention at this level of government. They're all focused on Congress. And so that means that it doesn't take very many of us to actually make a difference, to actually make your voices feel like the whole state is calling. So you have to really use that power, because if you don't, then it only takes a small number of people on the other side of the issue to call and make their voices feel like the whole state is calling. So it just takes a small number of people to make a difference, which means we have to use our voices.
Yes.
So if you're not a member of our group, definitely recommend joining our Facebook page, How Things Work at the Ohio State House. We post lots of calls to action on there. People post questions and we answer it. We post about upcoming events. And I have it here too. So if you're on Twitter, you can follow us on Twitter as well. We have a cool list of reporters on there. So if you want to follow State House reporters, you can follow that list. Or if you're not a social media fan, you can just email me questions. And I'll send all this to Richard as well, so you don't have to worry about writing this down. But I definitely recommend following us on social media so that you can keep up with the calls to action. And this is a basic explainer of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So first, I'll tell you about why the budget matters, why you should care. Then I'll tell you about just some real basics, like a couple details, a couple definitions. And then we'll talk through the process. So how the budget actually moves through the State House and what you can do about it. And then I'll tell you some resources that we have available, which I'll send to you afterwards. And then we can do some Q&A. All right. So the budget is very important. Every 2 years, Ohio passes budget legislation it's massive. The main budget bill is thousands and thousands of pages long, to fund or not fund every major program in the state for the next 2 years. So we are in that process right now, 2021. So the budget that we pass will go through 2023. And this is just a small list of reasons why you should be caring about the budget. If you care about school funding, if you care about broadband internet or local government funding or small businesses or mental health or COVID or food assistance or Medicare and Medicaid, literally all of this, the politics behind it is whether or not people can actually get these programs funded and whether or not we can actually pay for these services that help so many people, or if the money goes towards other things, like, for example, tax cuts to the largest businesses and business owners in Ohio. So it really is what your priorities are and whether or not there's money behind your priorities. So there's a ton of politics connected to every issue. Every issue you care about is connected to the money in the budget. So we need you all to be involved to make sure that our money, your tax dollars, are paying for things that you care about. So one example is school funding reform. Talked about this a little bit, but Ohio's school funding system has been ruled unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court since 1997. They've actually ruled several times that it's unconstitutional. Our school funding system right now relies too much on property taxes. So that basically means if you live in a poor neighborhood, you're probably going to go to a poor school. That is so unfair. It's shameful. It means that it's really hard to break that cycle of poverty to actually get a good education and get out of the bad neighborhood. Right now, our zip code really determines the quality of our education, and that is unacceptable. So this year, there is an attempt to fix the school funding system in the state budget, but we have to fight to get that through. It's going to have actually a lot of trouble getting through the Senate, especially. So that is one of our big priorities for this year. Another big thing we talk about in the budget is the LLC loophole. So there are lots of tax loopholes written into the budget, but this one is particularly egregious. This loophole costs taxpayers over $1 billion every single year. It was supposed to be written to help small businesses. The Republicans will call it the small business tax cut. The Democrats will call it the LLC loophole. It's the same. They're both talking about the same thing, but it was supposed to help small businesses create more jobs, hire more workers. But instead, it was written so loosely that basically anyone with an LLC or a pass-through entity can pay $0 in income taxes. So we often see lawyers in Ohio end up paying less than their secretaries, for example. It really makes the richest Ohioans richer, and it costs you $1 billion a year, 1.1 billion to be specific. And so we also know there's studies that have shown it's not created any jobs because, businesses don't hire people when they have more money. They hire people when demand increases. So it really is one of the things that we could do is tighten the LLC loophole, narrow it so that it actually helps those small businesses. And so it's still doing its purpose, but it's also saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year that we could be spending on anything else. This is just a few articles that have been written over the last few years, most of them by the late reporter Jim Siegel from the Dispatch. He is just an incredible loss to Ohio that he passed away so young. But these articles are just a few of the ones showing that the LLC loophole, or as the Republicans call it, the business tax break, does not actually help the people that it's meant to help. It's helping the richest Ohioans get richer. So another reason to care about the budget is the local government fund. So about 10 years ago, the Kasich administration drained the local government fund, which is money that's supposed to go to help local governments pay for things like road repairs and park maintenance and infrastructure projects. But the Kasich administration drained the budget for the local government fund, spent it on their own state loopholes, state budget cuts, and then they've never replaced that money. So the supermajority in the Statehouse, that's the Republican Party, they have never restored the money that was supposed to go to local governments. So that means that our local governments are having to deal every year with less money than they're used to. It means they have to do a lot of things to try and make up for that. They will put more levies on the ballot. They will go longer without filling potholes. They will put up things like speeding cameras. They'll send officers out to give more traffic tickets. Sometimes they even end up laying off police and fire because they can't afford them. And so then your police fire response times are slower. Sometimes it ends up, there's less training available to our first responders, which is unsafe for them and you. So truly it's dangerous. It's really a huge problem in so many areas of local government funding of your daily existence. Those potholes outside your house are significantly because we have drained the local government fund for the last 10 years and not restored that money. Another reason to care about the budget is infant mortality. So Ohio's infant mortality rate is pretty high. It's especially high, horrifically high for Black babies. It's 2.5 to 3 times higher for Black babies than white babies that they do not reach the age of 1 in Ohio. And there are a ton of ways that we could help save these children's lives in the budget. We could pay for infant mortality prevention programs, healthcare services for pregnant mothers. We could do public education around safe sleep. We could do paid leave, economic support programs. There's so many things we could do that are proven to help keep both pregnant women and babies under the age of 1 safe and healthy so that children can reach that milestone. But we have to fund those as a priority in the budget. So that's a few reasons why you should care about the budget. I'm going to tell you just a few basics about the State House and the budget process, and then we will get into how it actually happens. So first term to know, we've talked about this before, a supermajority. So right now in Ohio, there are super majorities of one party, the Republican Party, in both branches of the State House, so the Senate and the House. That means that there are so many Republican members that they basically can pass laws without anyone else's help. If the governor decides to be more moderate on something and veto a bill, there are enough Republicans in the State House to override that veto and force something into law. So you can see here there are 25 Republicans to 8 Democrats in the Senate, for example. So that is just something to think through as we go through the budget process, that a lot of this is going to be public pressure on those Republican members because logistically they could pass whatever budget they wanted without the Democrat support. So it's going to take a lot of public pressure to get them to do certain things. Another term to know that's budget specific is fiscal year. So the fiscal year is the budget year. It's different than a calendar year. Ohio's fiscal year starts on July 1st and goes through June 30th of the next year. So a fiscal year is known by the calendar year when it ends. So right now, because it's not July yet, we are in fiscal year 2021. But at the end of June 30th of this year, we'll go into fiscal year 2022. And the Ohio budget has to be passed by the end of the fiscal year, by June 30th of this year. So the budget process is going on right now and it has to be done by midnight on June 30th. And then it'll go into effect for 2 years. Another thing to know, Ohio's Constitution requires a balanced budget. So there's a lot of discussion about how to bring in enough revenue to pay for all of the services that we need to do as a state. There are several bills that make up the budget. This is kind of complicated. We are mostly going to focus, in fact, entirely tonight, going to focus on the operating budget. That's the main one, thousands of pages. It funds most of the state agencies and the legislature. There are other bills that I'm going to mention here just so you understand that there are several bills that make up the budget. But the one we're going to talk about tonight is the one that everyone's going to be focusing on, which is the operating budget. So a couple other budget bills to mention. The transportation budget sometimes gets kind of controversial. Last time around it did because it appropriates the gas tax. You may remember they raised the gas tax a little bit a couple years ago. So that budget actually got kind of heated for a little bit there. It funds programs dealing with motor vehicle fuel taxes and registration fees. So we also have the workers' compensation budget, which is money for the Bureau of Workers' Comp and the Industrial Commission. And then there's also going to be 2 other bills connected to the budget that they pass next year that we are just going to mention here quickly. One is the capital budget, the capital appropriations bill. If you actually know anyone who runs a local project or local charitable group or arts project or venture, and they are trying to find funding for it, something that would do good for your community, you should contact your local legislator and see if this program or entity would be able to get capital budget funding, because this allocates money to long-term benefits to communities. So sometimes they'll restore, old theaters. I've seen that done before, or local charitable projects. And so you should contact your legislator and see if your project of interest in your local area is able to apply for capital budget funding. And then there's also the reappropriations bill, which will just deal with construction and projects that are taking longer than we thought they would. But again, tonight we are going to be talking about the operating budget. That's the big one. It funds almost every program in the state. Most of the things I talked about earlier are going to be in the operating budget as well. So here is where the money comes from in the operating budget. About half of it comes from federal funds. So Medicaid gets a lot of federal money, obviously. The TANF funds, so Needy Families Fund, also gets money from the federal government. So about half our budget money coming from Congress. The other half comes from, you see this pie chart here. This is from a couple years ago, but it's still pretty accurate. There's a lot of politics connected to where our revenue comes from. So some folks, a lot of times the Democrats will get unhappy that the sales tax is so high. Such a big percentage of our budget comes from sales tax, because the sales tax is one of the ones that really hurts poor folks, because everybody has to buy school supplies and everybody has to buy, different goods for their family. But with our sales taxes so high, that impacts lower income folks who still have to buy those products, but it's a higher percent of their wage. There's a lot of people also who think that the income tax should be either higher or lower. The argument is that your income tax is less of a percentage of your wealth when you have a higher income. So there's debate about that. There's also debate about whether or not businesses should be paying more taxes. There's debate about whether or not we should raise the lottery tax and the cigarette tax, some of the sin taxes. So it's all just politics to see where the money actually comes from. All right, so now we're going to talk through how the process actually occurs. So the first step of the budget is the executive budget. This happened on February 1st of this year. Governor DeWine releases what's basically his dream version of the budget. If he could write the budget all by himself, this is what it would look like. So that's the executive budget. He introduced that on February 1st. And then as kind of a courtesy to the governor, his budget bill is introduced in the House, in the Finance Committee in the House, as an operating budget bill. But they introduce it exactly the way he wrote it, basically. It's thousands of pages long. Then step 2, so it's been introduced in the House. It always goes to the House first, which is unusual for bills. It starts having lots of hearings in the House. So because the budget is so big, they can't hear the whole thing in one committee. They break the budget into different pieces and they have hearings on different sections of it in lots of different subcommittees all over the House at the same time, which is very complicated because it means that several committees all over the State House are hearing the same bill, just different pieces of it, probably often on the same day. So if you care about, for example, education funding, you would probably go and testify in one of the education subcommittees. So we're still at step 2 is the House, like we talked about. It gets 2 major rewrites in the House. The first one is called a substitute bill. The state reps get suggestions from citizens, from Ohioans, and they submit their amendments to the House leadership. And all those amendments get turned into a substitute bill. Obviously, the leadership decides which amendments they accept. They often don't accept Democratic amendments, which is very frustrating. But this is the process that we just went through pretty recently, a week or two ago. And then they very quickly turn around a second draft of the budget called the Omnibus Amendment. And that is based on, they have some hearings on that. And then they'll send this Omnibus Amendment to the Senate. So this is, the House has made 2 different changes to the budget. They send it over to the Senate. Step 3, so the budget's in the Senate. I wrote probably sometime in May. They actually did it faster this year than I've ever seen it done before. They just passed the budget over to the Senate last week. And so it's already over there, even though we're not yet in May. And the same process happens in the Senate. So the bill has a ton of hearings broken down into different pieces in different committees and subcommittees in the Senate. Although interestingly, they didn't do subcommittees this year in the Senate. They just broke it into lots of committees. But the same thing is happening. Lots of hearings happening all over the Statehouse at the same time on this big giant bill. And this process, this slide is what we're at right now. They're starting to have hearings in the Senate on the budget. So same process, just like in the House, there are 2 different changes, 2 different rewrites that they do to the bill, the substitute bill, and then the Omnibus Amendment. And you can contact your legislator right now and ask for amendments to the budget, and they will submit them for the substitute bill. So the next step is the House sends the bill back to the Senate. If you've watched Ohio State House politics before, you know how this works, except with the budget, it usually ends differently. So usually the Senate will send a bill back to the House, and the House will agree, just a yes or no, up or down vote to the Senate's changes to the bill, and then they send it to the governor. But this time, because the budget is so big, the House always votes no on the Senate's changes. They don't get a chance to make any changes of their own. They just say, no, we don't approve. And so then what happens is there is a step 4 that we don't see very often in Ohio politics called a conference committee. So once the bill has gotten through the House and the Senate, but the Senate and the House don't agree on each other's changes, we have to do what's called a conference committee. They will send a couple members, usually 6, so 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat from the Senate, and 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat from the House. They send them basically to their own special committee where they fight out their changes to the budget in a room together. At this point in the process, these 6 people are really the only ones who impact the budget. No public testimony is allowed, and literally anything can be added at this point. These 6 people hold a lot of power. So when this part of the process is going on, which will probably be in June, we'll be asking you to contact these 6 members and demand certain things in the budget, because they hold all the power at this point. So then once those 6 people come up with all of their fixes to the different controversies that people were having over the different changes to the bill, they send their version back to the House and the Senate, and they can only vote yes or no. They can't make any more changes at this point, but they always vote yes. So after the budget comes out of the conference committee, goes to the House and Senate, and they all vote yes. And then it goes to the governor. But interestingly, because there is money connected to this bill, there's funds allocated, the governor can go line by line and cross out things that he doesn't like. He can't make changes, like he can't add more money to a program if he wanted it to get more money, but he can cancel entire programs if he wants by line item vetoing any of the lines in the budget that he doesn't like. And he'll do that with probably several dozen lines. So on the night that the budget is sent to the governor, which is usually very, very late June, we will be calling the governor and asking him to line item veto some of the worst pieces of the budget. And this entire process has to be finished by midnight on June 30th. So it's chaos and it happens all at once. And then it's done really, really quickly. So we're about to get into May. The budget just got to the Senate. And now we have what is probably about 2 months to do the whole rest of the process. So a couple resources, and I'll send these all to Richard so he can send them to you, but legislature.ohio.gov will let you look at the different House and Senate committees, and you can sign up for their notice lists, which I'm sure you all have done with previous, because I know we've talked about this with previous types of bills, but it'll show you, I'm going to click on the House here. And if you scroll down, it'll show you all the subcommittees, which are all the different committees that will be hearing different pieces of the budget all at once. So if you're interested, especially interested in any of these, you can contact them and you can ask to be put on their notice list, and they will start sending you emails when they're hearing different pieces of the budget, and you can come in and testify or submit testimony if you want. So I just clicked on the Finance Committee or Subcommittee for Primary and Secondary Education. This is the subcommittee that's going to be hearing the school finance plan, the school funding reform plan. So if you're interested in that, you can contact the chair, which is Tracy Richardson, and just click on her face and it'll take you to her page, and you can contact her and ask to be put on her committee notice list. And you'll start getting notices from the subcommittee so that you can know which pieces of the budget are moving and when. Although at this point, like I said, you'll need to be contacting the Senate subcommittees because the bill has moved over to the Senate at this point. All right, so here are several advocacy organizations that are really intensely focused on the budget. These are some of my favorite ones in Ohio, and I will send you links to all of them. So you can sign up for their email lists, or you can follow them on social media, and they will give you notifications about specific things that they're seeing in the budget that they want you to call for or against. That really helps narrow down all of the chaos of the budget with these organizations telling you what to look for specifically. So I've mentioned testifying in committee, and that is something that you have the ability to do with any bill, but sometimes it's really valuable to do it with the budget just because it's so big that they will take citizen ideas into account just because they haven't had a chance to read the whole bill themselves oftentimes. So obviously your goal is to testify in person if possible. Right now, we do not allow a virtual testimony, which is really disappointing. There's no reason for them to not allow virtual testimony. But so if you want to testify in person, you actually have to physically show up. But that is the most valuable way to do it if you can, because it allows for the legislators to ask you questions. You're also standing there in front of them, so they have to listen to you, which is nice. But of course, we do make it difficult to testify. We tend to have committees at 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesdays, and I can't really tell you when the committee will end. I can only tell you when it starts, so you may have to give up some of your day to participate in that. So if you can't come in and testify in person, you can also submit written only testimony, which is still very valuable, especially if you can get a lot of folks to testify written only and get those large numbers of testimonies in there. They will see them. They have them on iPads in front of them, but I can't promise you they will read the testimony. So if you can get there in person, recommend it. So submitting testimony is very simple. So simple, I can show you it in one slide. So once you hear that there is going to be a hearing on your bill or your piece of the bill, you write your testimony, or you can write your testimony in advance if you're getting ready. And then you email it to the chair of the committee. You want to do that 24 hours in advance. And you also want to send them a witness slip, which is just basic information about you. And I also have a witness slip, a blank one that I can send to Richard as well. So you don't have to wait for the chair to send you one. You can just email it with your testimony. And then literally, if you're testifying written only, that's it. You've just testified. It'll be officially in the record, and it'll be online and shareable, which is great. And if you're coming to testify in person, then you just show up. Here is an example of some Ohio State students who came in to testify, because it's so uncommon for us to get citizens actually coming in to testify that when it happens, a lot of times the press will pay attention. They will write stories just about the fact that Ohioans came in to participate in the process. Normally we get the same, 8 or 9 lobbyists coming in and testifying. over and over again. So when a large group of folks come in, especially students, they really take note. So it can be very useful to do it if you're able. If you're writing your testimony, a couple things to remember. You want to be short and sweet. So if there's a lot of testimony, they will likely limit you to 2 or 3 minutes a person. So you want to make them count. You also want to think about your audience. So think of your most conservative relative and try and pitch your argument to them. Because there is a supermajority of Republican members in the State House, in the House and Senate, there will also be a supermajority of Republicans on each committee. So it's important to kind of target your messaging at the Republicans members if you can. Obviously, though, you can write whatever you want. So here is a template to write your testimony. I will also send this to Richard so he can email it out to you. It's very basic layout. This is the same way that the professionals are doing it, the lobbyists are doing it. So you can write out your testimony and be sure you're doing it properly. You just address the members of the committee. You tell them who you are and why you care about whatever piece of the bill you're testifying on. And then you give them a little bit of explanation for why you feel the way you do for or against the thing you're testifying on. And then you ask them to do the thing. So you ask them to remove a certain piece from the budget, or you ask them to add more money in the budget for a certain thing. And then you open yourself up to questions. We also have live broadcasts of committee hearings now, which is great. This is actually a huge win for the State House Democrats. They have been fighting for what is actually decades at this point to get all of the committee hearings and Senate and House sessions broadcast to the public so that you don't have to show up in person to know what's going on at your State House. But they were stopped for years, literally years. Literally all we needed to do was have the leadership in the State House say that they could turn on the cameras. And that fight took over 2 decades, but they were successful a year or two ago now. And we now have ohiochannel.org has every single committee hearing and Senate and House session live online for free. You don't even need an account. And then it's archived there too. So you can go back and watch those videos as well, which is very cool. This is what ohiochannel.org looks like. If you haven't been on it yet, some of you may have watched Governor DeWine's COVID press conferences there during the past year. So you'll see all the committees are there and the subcommittees are there as well. So another resource that's available to us for the budget, this is budget.ohio.gov. This is the governor's dream version of the budget and all the fact sheets and data that he used to write his dream version of the budget, the executive budget. And you can see there, kind of where the governor's priorities are and what he wants to fund. It also can give you a good hint at what he may line item veto once the budget gets back to him. This, though, is the most important website for following the budget. It's www.lsc.ohio.gov. For some reason, you need the www. I don't know why, but you do. And it's the Legislative Service Commission website. They are the nonpartisan group, mostly lawyers, that writes our bills for us. So they are already very important people, but during the budget process, they do just so much more. I'm going to click here on this Budget Central tab. You'll see in the middle left there, there's a Budget Central tab. I'm going to click on it and I'll show you some of the amazing things that they do for us during the budget process. So you'll see here, it's got the budget for the 134th General Assembly. That's what we're in right now. That's the 2-year period that we are in. But I'm going to click on the 133rd because obviously they've been through the whole process. So there's more documents available. So I'm just going to click on the old one to show you what's available to us. But if you go to this website and you go to the 134th General Assembly, it'll show you all the documents through where we are in the process right now. So you see here all these different spreadsheets and documents you can use to follow the budget. You can see the appropriation spreadsheet will show you literally every amount of money that's going towards every single program and item in the budget if you want to look through it. But my favorite thing is the comparison document. You see it down there at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to click on that and show you how that works. That is the document that we use just constantly when I worked at the State House. So the comparison document, we call it the comp doc. It works like this. So you'll see it's broken down into 4 columns. So the governor's budget, that's the governor's dream version of the budget, is introduced first. So that's the left-hand column. It literally, this budget or this document is hundreds and hundreds of pages long, and it shows you every single line, every single amount of money that is in the budget and what it's going to go towards. And then you can follow each individual line through every part of the process. So you'll see here the highlighted portion, the $200 or $200,000 a year was in the governor's version of the budget. And then it was passed by the House and they kept that same $200,000. They didn't make any change. Then the Senate agreed with them. And then so that line of $200,000 became part of the bill, became law at the end. So you'll see it goes to the House, goes to the Senate, and then as enacted is on the right there. I highlighted this because it's a good example of how no matter what issue you personally care about, you have to care about the budget as well because of that issue. So this $200,000 a year goes towards a program that trains more folks to carry guns in our schools. And Moms Demand Action does not support the idea of taxpayer dollars going towards putting more guns in schools. So they tend to fight against this money every year. And you will see that this last time around, they were unsuccessful, and that $200,000 a year for that training program did become part of the budget. But you can go through and literally Control F search, if you know how to do Control F search, and you can type in keywords and actually look for different words to find out different money that is in the budget. A lot of times we find hidden gems in there, things that we didn't know were in the budget by doing Control F searches and doing keyword searches. So that might be something fun for you if you've got some extra time. But this last thing to remember, anything you do at the State House level is so much more than was happening there before. I know I've just thrown a ton of information at you. It's probably very overwhelming, but the only thing that you really have to remember is just how important your voice is at this level. You may be the only person calling all day about the budget. You may be the only person calling about the specific piece of the budget that you care about. And you alone may have enough, you may call and get the right person at the right time and be able to get your thing either added or removed from the budget just by taking the time to contact them. It is really unbelievable how much power the public has, and we just need to use it. So if you're interested in supporting this program, helping me pay for things like a Zoom account, you can donate at How Things Work at the State House on GoFundMe, but it's okay. It's less important right now because I'm not driving around the state, so I don't have to pay for gas.
Yeah. How do we find that again? I want to make sure we all know where that is so we can support your work, because you are not paid by any other organization to do this.
I'm not. It's a crazy hobby of mine.
Yes.
GoFundMe.com, and then you just type How Things Work at the State House in the search, and it'll come up. Let's see. All right, now I'm going to unshare my screen, and I'll come back in and answer any questions that you have.
Terrific. Who's first? This is great, Rachel. And the fact that we can review it is with the notes that you'll send to us, and also this recording. Who's first with a question? Lucy.
Rachel, how are the 6 people selected? That seems like a pretty big deal.
Yes, that is a great question. So it's normally going to be the chair of the Finance Committee in the House and the Senate. So they pretty much have like a golden ticket. They're definitely going to be on the 6 group of people, but then the rest of them, it's sometimes political who ends up getting in there. So there is going to be, I can't tell you who the 6 will be, except I can tell you that the chairs of the finance committees will probably be on it.
Yes. Who's next? My question is that in our work with the 2 organizations that I organize, and many of us serve on one or the other, or some both, we work on what we call healthy democracy kinds of things, like voting and elections, maybe stuff that Frank LaRose administers. And then the other one is environment issues, Rachel. Now, you said Control F. That would be one way to go find in there. But what, any other suggestions for us to find the things that are directly focused to our organizational goals?
Yes, so there are a lot of, I'm sure you're also already following some of the issue organizations in Ohio,
Yes.
like the Sierra Club and the Ohio Environmental Council,
Yes.
for example. They are very good about pointing out good and bad things in the
Oh,
budget.
good.
There are actually some really scary ones this year around the environment that we're going to have to fight. There's some really bad ones having to do with fracking and drilling, that I know the Ohio Environmental Council especially is going to have people contact their legislators about. So if you are already following those issue organizations,
Yes,
they will often tell you which pieces of the budget are worrying them.
good. What about on the voting side? Is that, how does LaRose, he makes up some of that, or is there any support in the Ohio budget for the county boards of elections and any of that sort of stuff?
There is, I would have to check which budget it is. I think it's probably in the operating budget as well. But yes, there is definitely money for different things connected to voting and elections in the budget. Some of it is federal money too, so that always complicates things. But yes, there is definitely some things in there.
And again, Control F, if we
Yeah,
do that and
stuff.
type it in, try different words.
Yeah, and
then
I think it's in the operating budget. So yeah, it's
And who might be you mentioned OEC and the Sierra Club for environment. Who
Yep.
might be the ones? Is that Common Cause and League, and who might
definitely
be?
Common Cause and League. Also the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, if you don't follow them. They do a lot with voting, and the All on the Line Ohio, if you don't follow them, they're incredible.
Yeah.
Definitely recommend All on the Line Ohio. And then Innovation Ohio as well, which is where I work.
Oh, good.
We're definitely going to be following voting for redistricting, voting for
Yeah,
literally every aspect of voting, including how it's impacted by the budget.
great. Who's next? Chuck.
Yeah, Rachel, the DeRolf decision was 1997. How come the state has been able to kick it down the road for 24 years?
That is a great question. And one of the things that has frustrated me most is realizing that, so the Supreme Court rules on whether or not things are constitutional, but they do not have an enforcement arm. So essentially, the legislature is just expected to listen to the court rulings and act on them, but there is nothing requiring that anywhere in the law. So there has not been any movement ever since the court ruled, and actually they've ruled 3 or 4 times since as well, since DeRolf, that different pieces of the school funding plan are unconstitutional. And so far the state just literally hasn't acted, which was very troubling for me to learn the first time.
Can they be sued?
They probably could be sued. I don't know if they have been or not, but there's no, legal there's no taking them to jail, for example. There's nothing like that. They probably could be sued though, I imagine.
Yeah,
Lawyer on that one.
Yeah, DeRolf was made up of the major school districts who were saying that they weren't getting proper funding. So I don't know if they ever tried to sue or if that was even a possibility.
That would be very interesting. Yes, you'd have to ask a lawyer for that. But yeah, it's literally just that the state hasn't done anything about it, which is wild.
Good. Who's next? Question, Antoinette.
Yes. How do county commissioners get money from the state? And is that is that usually a sizable part of their budget, or?
That is a great question, and I do not know the answer, so I'm not going to make one up, but I will find it out for you and get back to you. I'll include that in my email to Richard afterwards.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's next?
Another question.
Chuck.
Chuck.
Yeah, the local government fund,
Mhm.
Kasich basically took that and balanced the budget with it, and they cut 800 million from schools. Why was he able to do that, and why do they not fund that? And I believe my property taxes have gone up dramatically, partially for that reason. Is that correct?
Yes, it's not entirely for that reason, but yeah, it's
Right.
definitely connected. And so the Republicans have gotten this question a lot recently, and they basically will say, well, there's nothing legally requiring us to fund any local governments, which is true. The local government fund was more of a tradition in the budget for years and years, and then they drained it and have just never put the money back. But it's not legally mandated, like what percentage of the budget goes towards local governments. But it is shockingly low and has been for a decade now. But yes, and property tax valuations is so complicated, has to do with, lots of different things that local governments will explain to me better than that. But yeah, a lot of what we're seeing, especially with taxes going up due to levies on the ballot, and increased numbers of levies on the ballot, is because of the fact that local governments are struggling to make up that money and they don't know where else to go. We're also, we're seeing more police out on the roads giving more tickets. We're seeing traffic cameras, all that.
Mhm.
Yes, who's next? Rachel, the governor creates the dream budget. As citizens, are we able to influence his process too? We're allowed, we're encouraged to do the others. And who helps him? How does he pull these out of the air or his pocket or whatever body part in order to create that, his dream budget?
So he works with a lot of different government agencies. They consult a lot of different organizations, but that's also political. Who the governor talks to before he writes his budget is also political, because there is not a lot of citizen involvement in that part of the process. It's really like that's considered the starting point, essentially. Is like we see what the governor's introduced and then people kind of jump in from there. But it is, he will, and you should go to that budget.ohio.gov because it'll list out the different organizations and documentation that they use to create the governor's budget. It's quite thorough, but it is sometimes political who they talked to ahead of time.
Lucy had a question.
Lucy.
You mentioned amendments can be added in the House and the Senate, but then the leadership can just kick it out. Who were you talking about when you said the leadership? The head of the finance, the president, the speaker?
All of the above. Yeah. So what's happening is basically, and this is happening right now in the Ohio Senate, is citizens are calling into their offices of their local legislator and they're giving amendments that they want. And the legislators are creating a list of amendments that they will submit to the finance chair, the finance committee chair. And basically the finance committee chairs decide which amendments get accepted into the budget. But the Senate president and the speaker of the House, when the budget's over there, they do also have a lot of impact over which amendments are accepted. And the Democrats tend to not get nearly as many accepted as the Republicans, obviously. So that is, and it's all very, it's very determined by who the chair is. And a lot of times there's a lot of like backroom deals where like Democrats are like trying to get some of their amendments accepted in. So it's all very political. But if you call the finance committee chair, that is the person probably with the most power over which amendments get accepted. That would be Matt Dolan in the Senate.
How amenable to suggestions is Senator Dolan?
He is, there are not very many members of the Statehouse who are, I would consider moderate anymore, but he's closer than most to moderate. So,
yeah. Who's next?
Worth trying.
Yeah, that's right. Chuck.
Yeah, Rachel, from what I understand, there's very little or no transparency. I mean, people can put things in there and they don't have to identify who put that in there.
Yep.
I mean, that came to a head when DeWine wanted to change wording to a man or to a married couple versus a man and a woman, and the Republicans wouldn't let him do it, but they have no idea who was fighting in that. So they can do all kinds of stuff and you have no idea where it comes from. Is that-
Right. The budget is just so big, a lot of times we'll get the new version of the budget and you just find little nuggets in there and you have no idea where they came from. Sometimes you can do a public records request and see if you can get some of the emails that were sent back and forth. So it's worth trying if you want. You could contact the chair's office and literally say, I am making a public records request for this information. They can put you off for a long time, but you'll end up eventually probably getting some of those emails if your request is narrow enough.
Hmm.
It's worth trying. We did a lot during ECOT. We had a lot of folks, public records requesting the Statehouse offices to try and figure out who was doing different shady things during the ECOT scandal. So it's definitely done.
Mhm.
But yeah, that happens a lot where you don't know where things came from.
In the conference committee, so it's 4 to 6 out of the 6 for Republicans.
Mhm.
Do they pay any attention to the 2 Democrats typically? Is it at all a fair, transparent process? And if gerrymandering, if redistricting is successful and the gap is narrowed between, even though the vote in Ohio is rather close, the dispersion of seats in the House and the Senate is so skewed because of the gerrymandering. So how does that all operate? And how does it work? Is it at all fair?
Well, no, but okay. So it's transparent in that it will be broadcast. So you can watch it happen. And you can contact these legislators, like call their offices and try and influence them that way. But there is no public testimony allowed during this process. And there really is not, the Democrats have the ability to make a lot of noise and maybe do some kind of like negotiations behind the scenes, try and get certain things in or out of the budget.
Yeah.
But in the end, they don't have the numbers, the voting power to actually stop bad things from getting in. So it's a lot of it is, that's where citizen calls really come into play.
Yeah.
If they think enough people are paying attention to an exceptionally bad thing in the budget, sometimes take it out just because they don't want to deal with us, which is nice.
Right.
So it's important because the Democrats don't have much logistical power to call. If redistricting changes the Statehouse, which it definitely could after this year, I don't actually know if that would change the makeup of the conference committee, just because the majority party would probably still get to choose more members for themselves. And I don't think there is a world where, at least in the next 2 years, the Democrats would be the majority at the Statehouse.
Yeah, so even if they have the majority, they'd still, instead of 3-3, they would still go with 4-2.
I imagine so, but that would be very interesting.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and
Rachel, I understand that they are looking at the redistricting thing that we passed, and they're trying to sort of circumvent it.
Yeah. Yes. So you may have heard the census data is late.
yeah.
So that is causing some complications. And the Senate President, Matt Huffman, is suggesting something that is truly just like, it cannot be acceptable. We can't allow it to happen. But basically what he's saying is that they should, because the census data is going to be late, they should shorten the redistricting process. And also that we should pass a constitutional amendment that would allow the majority or the legislature to decide the timeline for redistricting anytime in the future that data is delayed. So that is just giving all the power back to the majority party in the Statehouse, which is exactly the opposite of what we all voted for. And it also would, because they're shortening the process, it would allow them to cut out a lot of the time when Ohioans have a chance to participate in the redistricting process. So it has to just be a non-starter, and that has to be us getting loud and saying that that's just unacceptable. And he has until, I believe, May 5th. So that's next week on Wednesday to get that amendment or that constitutional amendment passed through the Statehouse, because then it would have to go on the ballot in November for all of you all to vote.
But does that also mean they don't have to follow what was passed about how they were going to do the gerrymandering?
Right. So They have to follow the laws still. The problem is that the new laws gave us very specific deadlines for when the maps have to be drawn. And we may not have the census data in time to meet those deadlines. And there isn't anything in the law that explains what to do if that happens. So they're basically trying to figure out what to do because they forgot to add that part into the law when they wrote it. But they do have to follow the rest of the law. It's just going to be there. My fear is that what they'll do is they'll say, hey, I guess the census data is late. That means we have to just pass this map that we magically already have drawn and that we have not actually shown anyone yet.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Right. That is my fear. But so we just have to be watching to make sure that doesn't happen, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
After the dream of the vision or the budget from the governor is put into the legislature, does the governor lobby the legislature himself or someday herself? Yay, Nan Whaley. So does the governor work the process as it's going on, or does the governor hold back and wait till they do their work?
I'm sure he does behind the scenes. And you know, he'll send like his budget director in to testify in the Statehouse on different pieces of the budget to explain, you know, why they did what they did. And I'm sure there's a lot of that going on behind the scenes as well. But, you know, for our purposes, like we stopped calling the governor until June when we want him to veto things.
That's right, because the power to draw the line item veto seems really important. And do governors really use that? They can't add anything, it sounds to me. Is that right?
Right. He can't add in any money. He can't like draw another zero somewhere, but he can literally go line by line and cut out things that he doesn't think the money should be going towards.
Does that occur very much? You said a couple dozen, I think.
Yeah, he'll do a few dozen. And sometimes he can even end entire programs that way. He can just be like, we're not funding that. And then the whole program will die. So that happens a couple times a year or a cycle too.
Wow. Because that seems like it could be destructive, assuming that he's not drawing the line through stuff that is Republican favored. Does he ever draw the line through things that are Republican favored?
Yes, the last two governors actually have been more moderate than the Statehouse Republicans. The Statehouse Republicans tend to be really, really far to the right. And the governor tends to be slightly more moderate Republican. And Governor DeWine seems to be that way too. Although, you know, he's far more extreme than I'd like him to be on most things. Yes. But I do think there's a chance that he would end up vetoing a couple things that the Republicans passed in the Statehouse.
And they don't have any recourse after that veto occurs. They can't come back and say, now we're going to supermajority you, DeWine.
Yeah, they could override individual line item vetoes.
Oh, they could.
Yep, that's supermajority, man. They have all the power.
Wow. Yeah. Who's next? What about the coverage by, you mentioned some of the organizations that cover the budget process. How about the media, meaning the more public or newspaper or journals or others? Do they cover the budget very carefully, or is it just too big and they don't have the resources to do much?
They definitely cover the biggest pieces of it. So a lot of their attention has been focused on the school funding reform fight, because that's a big one this year. They also, I've seen a couple stories on broadband internet in the budget, things like that. So they'll cover the big stuff. They also will write stories about things that are getting a lot of citizen attention. So if there's a big controversy online about some piece of the budget, they will often write a story based on that public outcry. So that's another reason to get really loud on the internet, especially Twitter. If you have Twitter, reporters are being told to sit on Twitter and look for content and tweet a certain number of times a day. So if you have that ability to make enough noise that they write a story about some piece of the budget that's especially problematic, definitely and doing that.
Great. Who's next? Why is the school budget this year, like Chot mentioned, being ignored so much? Why is it this year that it is getting the attention? And is there any chance that it actually could change or make just the school funding in Ohio?
Yeah, so actually the school funding reform plan has been around for a little bit. It's bipartisan. It's got Republicans and Democrats on it. And the last General Assembly, for the last several years, they went through a whole long research process. They talked to all these experts. They changed the bill. You may have heard of it last year. It was called the Cupp-Patterson Funding Plan. It was very popular among Democrats and Republicans. And it didn't end up passing the Senate. It got through the House, but not the Senate last time around. So this time around, they've reintroduced it as House Bill 1, and they put House Bill 1, not exactly the same, but a large chunk of House Bill 1 in the budget as the school funding reform plan. So the House just passed school funding reform through their House, through their version of the budget. But now it's in the Senate, and the Senate is the problem. Is Matt Huffman, who's the Senate president, is not a fan of public schools. He likes charter schools. He likes vouchers. He likes funding for private schools wherever possible. And so he is not a fan of the school funding plan that's in the House version. And there's rumors that he's going to have someone introduce a counter version from the Senate that is going to be a real problem. So Matt Huffman is our big target for enough public pressure that he keeps House Bill 1 in the budget, or the Fair School Funding Plan is what they're calling it.
Do you consider that plan fair? Is it a significant move towards equalizing funding for rich and poor school districts throughout the state?
Absolutely. I mean, nothing is perfect, right? But it is got support of all of the teachers' organizations, the major ones in the state. They've even come together. The two different major teachers' organizations in Ohio have come together to fight for it as a group, which is really cool. It's got Republican and Democrat support. It's got all the major educator organizations on board. It's a huge step in the right direction. The House version is. The version that we're hearing could come from the Senate is quite scary.
What should we do just now that we hear that you're giving an affirmation to the House version?
Mm-hmm.
What should we do? Is that the communication with Huffman's?
Yeah. Call him, and then call Matt Dolan, who is the finance chair, and then call whoever so the Senate is very strange this year. They didn't create subcommittees for the finance committee, which they normally do. Instead, they are just having hearings on the bill in different committees. So you should call the education committee chair, probably K-12 education committee, and the finance committee chair, Matt Dolan. And then Matt Huffman is the big one, and tell them to keep the Fair School Funding Plan in the budget.
Right. Wow. That seems so important.
It is. It is one of the most important things we could do for the state for the next decade.
As someone whose child graduated from public school a long time ago, and a grandson who graduated from public school last year, I have not really paid attention to this whole funding of schools. Could you give me a little background information about why Huffman is so intent on supporting private schools and the vouchers and that approach rather than ensuring that we have a good public school system in our state?
I truly couldn't tell you. I do not understand it. I, as a, 90% of Ohio students attend public schools. It seems like we should all be in favor of making them strong, but it really just is a difference of political opinion. He believes that our public schools are not doing well and that we need to fix that problem by getting as many kids as possible into the private schools, by expanding the income level that it requires to get a voucher to a private school, for example. And one of the really interesting things about the House version of the Fair School Funding Plan is that it wouldn't take so much money from the pot of money that goes to our public schools and give it to the private schools. It would fund private schools through another funding source, which seems really basic to me. But Matt Huffman is not, it's publicly at least, a fan of that idea. He thinks it should all come from the same pot and that most of our money should be going towards these private schools. And it really is a difference of
Can you tell me, what is the governor on this? Because I get the feeling that he is for charters and vouchers. And has he ever crossed the line for how much money they're giving away from the public schools?
That's a great question, because you're right. He has definitely shown in the past, support for at least some of the voucher type programs and the charter school type programs. But I think, I don't want to say, but I would hope that he is in favor of the Fair School Funding Plan, just because there's so many Republicans on it. It's really like, so far kind of geared up to be like Matt Huffman versus the world.
Yeah.
And so I would hope at least that the governor would be on most of the Republican side on the Fair School Funding Plan, but I don't know if I've heard him say publicly either way.
John.
Yeah, the whole charter school and voucher thing got started years ago because the Republicans were trying to weaken the teachers' unions. So they figured they had too much power, and that if they could weaken them, they would, increase the likelihood of Republicans getting elected.
I believe it. And honestly, it's really the most exhausting thing to me is that the argument works. So they take all the money away from the public schools, and then the public schools struggle, and then they say public schools are terrible.
Yeah.
We need our kids out. And you're like, why don't we just fund them properly? It is truly shocking how many people that argument works on.
What does the data show, Rachel, do you know, of how are the charter schools and the voucher program producing better education? I thought I've seen some reports that they actually aren't superior in their results.
Ohio does not regulate our charter schools nearly as stringently as we regulate the public schools, which is a huge problem. You saw, just a couple of years ago with the online charter schools with ECOT, we have a completely different set of rules that the charter schools and public schools have to follow, and their rules are not as strict. And so these kids oftentimes are being tricked into going to a charter school that has popped up in what is often like an abandoned warehouse a few blocks down from their house. They're spending a lot of their budget on advertising to make the school look really appealing on like local television. They'll reach out to very specific families who meet a very specific demographic and try and coax them to come to their school. It is really, some of the stuff I've seen working through the online charter school scandals has been really eye-opening. And obviously, there are good charter schools. There are some good ones, but the amount of money that we're spending taking away from our public schools to send to these charter schools when so many of them are struggling.
And two things. One is a lot of the charter schools are for profit.
Yes.
And so that means the kids don't come first.
Yep.
Another thing they do is when they rate the public schools for progress, say your school has had a 92% rating last year. If it stays at 92 or goes to 91, they then say that you have not met their goal for you. Mm-hmm. And so that's when they tell you the public schools are not doing as well.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like catch-22.
It is.
John. Yeah, a couple of things. I believe with the charter schools, the schools look to see where a child is actually in which school, like there's a certain day, like in October. Mm-hmm. And then the funding goes to that school. Mm-hmm. And I do believe if that child transfers back to a public school, the money does not follow to that school.
Right.
Wow. And a couple of years ago, the NAACP nationally looked at charter schools and said, we do not support them because they are not quality.
Yes.
That was the national NAACP.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of times if a kid leaves the public school and goes to a charter school, the charter school gets more money than the kid was getting from the state because they also take that local money with them. And so the school loses more money than they were getting from the state to teach that child.
Well, a
Wow.
few years ago, when I was tutoring at one of the schools on the west side, what would happen around March when they do the testing?
Mhm.
Parochial schools and charter schools get rid of those kids, put them back into public schools because if their testing doesn't look good. So I was at Queen City, I forget which one, but they went to so many children, and then all of a sudden they had a whole bunch of kids that they were responsible for. This was put into the public schools.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'd like to shift here in our last few minutes together, Rachel.
Mhm.
And I'm real curious. What you are so experienced and talented and working for
You're too nice to me, Richard.
powerful political organizations and causes in Columbus, but you shifted recently to become communications director from Innovate with Innovation Ohio. What is it that lured you to take that position?
Yeah, so Innovation Ohio has been around a while. They have really in the past focused on the Statehouse and trying to advocate for issues at the Statehouse, but they're really branching out now in a way that I'm very excited for.
Yeah.
They want to become kind of the messaging and communications hub for progressive politics in Ohio at all the levels, state, local, and federal.
Yeah.
And they want to be a resource where they can provide, talking points for legislators and for activists and tools to try and help get your bills and issues passed. They want to really be public facing, and it's a very exciting transition. So I am loving that I get to be part of it. They have a new CEO who's Desiree Timms. You may remember her. She ran for Congress last year in the Dayton area. She's great. And she has come in to really kind of move the organization forward to be this forward facing to like a resource for the public. So I'm very excited. If you're not on their list yet, I'll send a sign up link. You can sign up for their email lists, and you can join us when we do fun things going forward.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
I love it. And I like that they're very lucky, I believe, to have you with all the knowledge and experience that you have. Would it be, we do these hour and a half, we call deep dives.
Mhm.
And, we've recently had Nan Whaley, or she came on a Tuesday, but
Mhm.
Tim Ryan, we have a lot of, and Lauren Wargo from the
Mhm.
Georgia and all. Do you think it would be possible that Desiree and perhaps you as the communication director could come in and really give us a deep understanding of Innovation Ohio, how we could serve your goals and how you could serve ours as activist organizations? What would be your suggestion of linking in between, partnering more between Bold New Democracy and our Indivisible group and Innovation Ohio?
Yeah, absolutely. We could certainly ask. Send me an email. I'll send you my Innovation Ohio email and just send a
Okay.
request there. We can do it that way.
Great. Yeah. I love the new, there's a new vision or purpose or mission for Innovation Ohio. How did that come about? It seems like it's a bigger scope or context in which to work. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it's a lot of it is Desiree. It's the person who's at the helm, and she's come in and really said that there's a gap in resources available to especially like grassroots activists out
Yes.
there, and a lot of we're missing the overall messaging that comes from the different organizations. A lot of it sometimes feels kind of segmented.
Yeah.
There's not really an organization that provides all the messaging for everyone. So she wants us to be that, and I couldn't be more thrilled. So really excited to see what we can do with it.
Wow, that is exciting.
Mhm.
Yeah, down here we have Green Umbrella, which pulls together a lot of the resources in the environmental movement from all different levels of environmental work. And they kind of coordinate that and it provides support to on the individual levels, but then the individual entities support the whole coalition
Mhm.
too. Is this kind of a coalition being formed here through Innovation Ohio?
Yes, we have partnerships with a lot of different groups, and so we're partnering with several different organizations right now we formed a coalition around redistricting. They're calling it the Equal Districts Coalition. There's dozens of groups in that. And we're all going to be coming together to fight for and against different things during the redistricting process, trying to hold the politicians accountable. They just issued a statement yesterday condemning Matt Huffman's proposal to shorten the redistricting process.
Yeah. Terrific. Other comments, questions for Rachel as we're coming in for the landing, coming into the harbor? Anything else?
And I'll send you the slides from tonight, and I'll send you all those resources. And Antoinette, I'll figure out what's going on with the budget and the county commissioners. That was a really interesting question.
Yeah, is there
Thanks.
something specific we can help you with in the coming week or 2 or 3, Rachel?
Yes, but let's think through. There's so many. I'm gonna pick my favorite one. Honestly, call Matt Huffman and
Okay.
tell him that you don't want him to shorten the redistricting process, and tell him to keep the fair school funding plan in the budget. He is the target of 2 things right now.
Great, let's do that, because sometimes we have to be careful not to get into, there's so many interests like education and environment, guns and all that. We have to be careful not to get pulled in too many directions. We try to stay focused to the democracy issues.
Right.
And to candidates that are supporters of that as well. But I think in this case, we can put the 2 together and really make a case that our members communicate with Huffman for those 2, redistricting and the school funding plan. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Fair school funding plan. I think
Fair school funding. That's right. It's good to have fair. We want fair districts. We want fair school funding.
Yes.
2 fairs.
Mhm.
Good. Closing, yes, Sam.
My question is, what's happening with the business of letting teachers bring guns into the classrooms?
Yeah, so there is a lot going on with that. So we allow educators and sometimes other folks in schools to carry guns in schools. And there's actually a bill right now that would significantly decrease the training requirement for carrying guns in schools. Is horrifying. That bill is, I believe, HB 99. Would significantly decrease, and it would allow the local school boards and like local community government to decide how much training they feel they want in their schools, and they could say 0 if they feel like it, which is terrifying. So we already allow the guns, and so in my opinion, if you're going to have guns in schools, you should have really well trained people carrying them, and so it seems like common sense, and that bill is moving in the State House right now, like as we speak.
Well, I can't imagine that a teacher or having a gun in the classroom. And first of all, older kids could get a hold of it.
Sure.
Right.
And then
Or younger kids accidentally.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, there are some teachers who shouldn't be allowed to have a gun.
And it feels, like we're forcing teachers to do 6 different jobs. They have to be a security guard and a teacher and a mental health counselor, and we're just demanding so much of them.
Well, I also have questions around what kind of liability risk is that for the school district, perhaps the legislators who approve that type of legislation allowing this to happen. If a family, who is going to be accountable if a kid does get a gun and then ends up murdering other people with
That is a really good
gun?
question. You should testify with
Yeah.
that. Do you want me to send you? I can
Thoughts and prayers will be with for the people who get killed in the schools. That's all they can. That's all they do.
Do you want me to send you some information on that bill?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because too, you don't notice the citizens very often around the country are performing these heroic acts of shooting a killer. It just doesn't happen very often. But also the fact you hardly ever have a clear shot. There's a lot of other people around. And how accurate is the teacher going to be? And what about other kids? I wouldn't want my child to be in an environment where teachers are starting to be shooting around the hallways or the classrooms. I think it'd be extremely dangerous for the people there at the school, more than the idiot coming in with the gun. I think it's more dangerous to the innocent than to the guilty.
Especially if they haven't received any training.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think it's fair for a teacher
that's
put
right.
in that position.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
They were saying, they were covering this on NPR as I was driving home this week, and they were saying resource officers are required to have like 700 hours of training,
Mhm.
but the minimum in this bill is like 8 hours of training for a
Oh.
teacher. Yeah,
8 hours.
8, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to be,
Mhm.
part of the training would be just to be able to be skillful at shooting accurately. I mean, how do they go? Do they have to go to driving ranges and practice? The basketball players go and practice shooting basketballs every day during the season. It seems like the teachers
Yeah.
would have to be going out and taking shooting range practice at least once every other week for an hour and shooting. How are they going to be accurate?
Right.
And are the legislators who passed that bill going to pay those teachers to salaries to do that
Yeah.
on their own time?
Right.
They can't do it during classroom time, that's for sure.
Right.
And so
Right.
many of our teachers now are getting second jobs to pay for their.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And Chot,
Exactly.
last point.
Yeah, well, I mean, think of all the training a cop gets and then think about how many times they fire and miss.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it's incredible. So
Right.
now you got a teacher with very little training who's going to be shooting possibly.
Right.
That's just, I mean, you're just asking for trouble.
Right.
Mhm.
It is. Well, not to end on here because I want to bring us back to budget again in your list of benefits. Will you send us I love your slide program, but I also want to honor your proprietary holding of that. The slide program or the PowerPoint that you have, is
Oh,
that
yeah.
part of what you share or not?
Yes, yeah, I'll send you the slides. Feel free to share them.
Great.
I'm
That's just excellent work, Rachel.
Really bad at monetizing what I do.
Yeah, and we got to remember, please, if you can, GoFundMe and then look up how the Ohio Statehouse works. And please support Rachel because this is done as a volunteer, generous, and been doing it for years. How many years has it been now? That you've
5
been-
years now. You've been doing this.
5 years.
Isn't that crazy?
Uh,
And people
Wow.
keep booking me. I have these like every week. It's crazy.
I know. Thank you for including this in. Thank you. Yay.
Thank you all for
Rachel.
coming. I really
Thank
appreciate you
you.
spending your evening with me.
Oh, it's an honor.
Likewise.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. And have a good night and
Yeah,
thanks for all your work.
thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Rachel. Bye, everybody.